Hello, welcome to my presentation on the 1998 through 1999 world snowfall record, or as I've chosen to call it, Party Like It's 1998 through 1999, the cumulative snowfall world record at Mount Baker, Washington. So, I think an interesting place to begin this is with the question of where is the snowiest place on Earth? And some places that might come to mind initially are places like Antarctica, the Arctic, Greenland. You imagine these places that are very cold. You typically imagine them with the wind blowing, lots of snow on the ground. I'm getting a very March of the Penguins vibe just thinking about it. But the truth is those places are actually so low in precipitation to be considered basically freezing deserts much of the time. So you have to imagine that it's not enough simply to be cold. You also need precipitation. So you begin to think of where are we going to get a lot of precipitation? What are some snowy places I can imagine? Perhaps you think of the Rockies, the Himalayas, the Alps, those mountainous regions where you're going to get the cold temperatures and you're going to get a lot of precipitation. But unfortunately, we don't really have a good methodology for measuring the snowfall of remote regions very accurately yet. The world is constantly changing and we're getting all of this amazing remote sensing data development here. So who knows what the future may hold. So you may think of some other places like Japan or Alaska. It's an interesting question to consider, especially if anyone out there is a skier or a snowboarder or a alpinist of any kind. You probably immediately think of places like Japan and Alaska because you have amazing resorts in Hokkaido, Japan, and you have these amazing ski resorts like Alyeska up in Alaska. But interestingly enough, the snowiest measured place on Earth as far as the single year of cumulative snowfall is actually Komakolshan, which is the indigenous name for Mount Baker in northwest Washington. So Mount Baker, if you imagine Washington State, is located on the east side of Puget Sound, all the way up at the very, very tippy top, very close to the Canadian border. The snowiest year on record was 1998 to 1999 when 1,140 inches of snow fell. That's the equivalent of 95 feet of snow. That snow year was measured July 1st, 1998 to June 30th, 1999. And it was measured at Mount Baker Ski Resort, which is 9 miles northeast of the specific summit of Mount Baker, again, Komakolshan. And this record was verified by the National Climate Extremes Committee. So you can see this really awesome photo on the right of a snowcat trying to blow snow off the roads and make it accessible. And you can see how that stop sign is just absolutely buried. So that gives you an idea of what some of that snowfall is going to look like in one of these mountainous areas. So we got to talk about the evolution of the event, because even though it was measured again from July 1st, 1998 to June 30th, 1999, obviously we can intuit that there's probably not a lot of snowfall happening for those July through probably September months. You're not going to see a lot of snow falling at Mount Baker. And this is a cool photo from the summit of Mount Baker here with that 1140 number right there. So, according to the witnesses, because this is the great news, is because we measured this at a ski resort. We have plenty of witnesses to record it, lots of different voices, lots of people to see this event as it developed. So it truly began with 35 straight days of snowfall from November into December. And during the season, 1 in every 3 days was considered a powder day, which for folks who are not skiers, that means that 1 out of every 3 days had 10 or more inches of fresh snow on the ground when they opened for the day. There were only 2 days in the month of February when it didn't snow, and they had 102 fresh inches in just the first week being open at the ski resort. This resulted in some crazy events. There were trees, these large Douglas fir trees that are, native to the region, obviously very, very well equipped to handle these sort of conditions. They're snapping off at the tops due to the weight of the snow. They had to cancel some events every year at Mount Baker. They have this amazing event called the Banked Slalom. It's this amazing slalom snow course that snowboarders have to ride. And they actually had to essentially cancel it because of a wild storm and the terrible conditions that rolled in. There were 80-mile-an-hour winds on the first day of the event that caused them to cancel it. And actually, an intrepid and plucky group of professional snowboarders chose to hike into the course, and they competed and completed all their first qualifying runs for the event in 53-mile-an-hour winds and 23 inches of fresh snow on the ground. And eventually the resort actually had to shut down for 2 days just to quote unquote dig out, as the acting director of the resort described it at the time. So it seems pretty crazy, but there was a ski resort that was experiencing this hydroclimatological phenomena where, ski resorts, obviously you want a lot of snow. Snow is great. Fresh snow especially is really great. I'm sure even folks who aren't skiers and snowboarders have heard people talk about, powder days. There's no friends on powder days. You got to get out there. You got to get fresh tracks. You got to get runs in. And they were actually canceling it because there truly is too much of a good thing at some points. So how does a snowfall record develop? I found this was a very interesting question to consider. And truly it comes down to a combination of a hydroclimatological event with the appropriate geographic location. Obviously, you need, again, those right conditions. You need the right cold temperatures, and you need the appropriate amount of moisture-rich air depositing precipitation in the area. I mean, you could get all of this precipitation in Death Valley, California, but it's obviously not going to cause a snowfall record because it's not the right type of location for this to develop. So first we look at what is the story with Coma Colson? What is the story with Mount Baker? So you look at Mount Baker specifically, and some important facts to consider is that Mount Baker is a stratovolcano. It is it's actually relatively young as far as stratovolcanoes go. They think it may be less than 100,000 years old, which is wildly young for the Northwest. I'm a geologist, and I can tell you that 100,000 years old is very, very recent for us. It's the highest summit in the North Cascades. It's host to 11 substantial glaciers that cover about 37.4 square kilometers. So that's pretty substantial, and that gives you some idea of the sort of conditions that Mount Baker plays host to. It is capable of supporting not only it is sufficient that there's enough snowfall there, but also it is capable of supporting cold enough year-round temperatures such that development of glaciers and it can sustain glaciers even throughout those warm summer months. And then in addition to that, it's in the Pacific Northwest, so we can take advantage of that Pacific jet stream, all of that moisture-rich air that is going to come in off of the Pacific and flow into those western United States. It's outside of the Olympic range shadow, so that's an important factor to consider as well for folks who aren't from the Pacific Northwest and aren't specifically from the Puget Sound area. They may not know this, but the Puget Sound is obviously a saltwater sound off of the Pacific, and it's in Washington State and plays host to most of our harbors. It was glacially carved, and it is flanked by mountain ranges. On the east side of the sound, we have the Cascades which is host to plenty of volcanoes. I'm sure you've heard of Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens. Mount Adams is technically considered part of the Southern Cascades, and this is Mount Baker, part of the Northern Cascades. It's host to a lot of really amazing hiking. If folks are outdoor enthusiasts, I definitely recommend it. And then on the west side of Puget Sound, you have the Olympic mountain range, which is another very high mountain range that was created during sort of the same orogenic events of subduction of the Farallon plate underneath North America, and then also accretion of those sediments from the ocean floor, causing the North American plate to buckle and develop volcanism. And so you have these two tall mountain ranges, and the Olympics basically cast a large rain shadow across areas of the Puget Sound where you have some sections that don't get quite as much precipitation as one might expect, because a lot of that precipitation gets caught up on the Olympic mountain ranges. And then the other great piece of information to remember is that the previous world record holder for accumulated snowfall in a single year was the Paradise Ranger Station in Mount Rainier, Washington from 1971 to 1972. So just a few hundred miles south in the same rough mountain range, same sort of regional dynamic as far as the way that the climate is going to interact with the geography, you had the other previous world record holder. So, and then you have to look at the specific hydroclimatological event that led to this happening, which is the 1998 to 1999 winter was a La Nina winter, which this great graphic down here in the bottom right can show you, means that the Pacific jet stream gets shifted slightly north, and it comes in a little bit higher up towards Washington and Oregon. So you end up seeing Washington and Oregon often with a lot more precipitation, while California and the Southwest United States end up being a little bit drier. So you get a lot more precipitation. And then in addition, it was noted that that year there was consistently and abnormally low freezing temperatures all winter long, which you can see might be because of that cooler air that came down from Alaska and northern Canada, the Yukon region. So you have the perfect storm, if you'll pardon the pun. You have that moisture-rich air from the Pacific jet stream meeting the orographic lifting, the mountain-generated lifting of the Cascade Mountains, causing that air, that moisture-rich air, to rise to higher elevation and turn into snowfall. And then you have the consistent low freezing temperatures, so that there's more likely for snowfall, and what snow there is going to stay on the ground even longer. So you have the perfect conditions for a record-setting winter. So what happens? Well, we have that 1,140 inches of snowfall, and it turns into this great year for the entire state of Washington for a couple different reasons. There's both the socioeconomic reasons and the recreational and tourism reasons, which I suppose could be bundled together, but I broke them out because, again, I'm a skier. I like to talk about skiing a lot, so I wanted to give it its own category. So the Pacific Northwest is actually highly dependent on yearly snowpack for food and for power. So the majority of our snowpack meltwater goes into dam systems. And you can see this here is a dam from Ross Lake, which is in North Cascades National Park in Washington, very close to Mount Baker. And all of the power from these dams like Diablo Dam, the Ross Lake Dam, go to power our cities like Seattle and Everett. And then in addition, on the east side of the Cascades, in areas of Washington that are a lot more agrarian and agriculture focused, that meltwater is crucial for irrigation, for producing all of the crops that Washington State relies on for food. So, and I included this great quote from a Maury Pelto paper that I really loved, which gives it very succinctly. That it says, the North Cascades of Washington extend from Interstate Highway 90 north to the Canadian border. They are bounded on the west by the Puget Lowlands and on the east by the Columbia and the Chewuk, formerly Chewak rivers. This area supports 750 glaciers, Post and others, 1971, that store as much water as all of Washington's lakes, rivers, and reservoirs combined, and provide approximately 230 billion gallons of water each summer. And nearly all of this water is used for irrigation and power generation. So the state of Washington relies really heavily on these cycles in the climate. We have the ENSO oscillations. And so when there's an El Nino winter, typically Washington will have a warmer and less wet winter than typical, which can lead to less regeneration of our summer snowpack and less water to feed our system. So we rely really heavily on these winters where we get tons of snowpack to feed our power plants, to feed our river systems, to feed our people through the irrigation of our crops. So it's really important, and it's a huge boom to people, to the economy. There have been years where Washington State has actually exported power because we had a surplus of power generation from our hydroelectric dams to where we were able to send power to other places and charge other states for our power. And then there was also the recreation and tourism aspect of it. So Mount Baker is, if you've never been to it, is kind of an interesting resort town. Resort is, it's called Mount Baker Ski Resort, but resort is sort of a misnomer. It's really a collection of chairlifts and a lodge outside of a tiny town called Glacier, Washington, and it truly is the end of the line. The Mount Baker Highway leads there. There's pretty much nothing beyond it on the highway, and unless you're going there to ski, there's no reason to go. There's not a lot in the way of hotels, places to stay, or places to eat. I think there's 3 restaurants that they typically recommend other than the food at the ski resort, which you should never eat anyways. It's way overpriced. But so this is a really small ski resort that had a very strong local following. It had a kind of an underground cult following. And this year, this crazy snow year, 1998 to 1999, boosted Mount Baker up to international fame. So there were pro snowboarders and skiers who flew in from around the world, from as far away as London, in the first month just to film this epic season. Season pass sales hit record numbers. The poor resort employees said it was a real strain. They broke 3 snowcat machines just trying to dig out. And they actually, usually at ski resorts, you hear about snow blowing or snow generation machines. The employees were developing machines just to melt the snow because there was so much. And so actually the entire resort developed the Mount Baker Film Festival in 1999 as a way of showcasing some of the art that featured Mount Baker and the surrounding area. And it turned into this great international fame moment for the entire community, and really developed a cult following for Mount Baker Ski Resort. So it was absolutely phenomenal. It is a fabled winter that we dream of, and if you guys are curious about reading more about it, I recommend any of the papers in this bibliography. So thank you so much.